Hey guys, today I want to talk about the best markets for virtual wholesaling for beginners and why. Hey guys, today I want to talk about the best markets for virtual wholesaling for beginners and why. Before we get into talking about the markets, I wanted to talk about one important thing. Your buyers and why they're buying. Who your buyers are and why they're buying is going to determine exactly what type of property you're going to look for when you're wholesaling and also what market you're going to choose. What buyer type each market has is really dependent on whether these properties are more of a cash flow property or an appreciation property. So if you don't know what that means, cash flow properties are properties that provide a higher amount of cash flow when you're talking about the rent versus the debt on the home. So for example, if somebody buys a $150,000 home and their mortgage payments are $900 a month, they're able to rent the house out for $1,400. Their cash flow would be $500 gross before they pay any expenses, property manager, maybe any utilities the landlord pays. That buyer would make $500 on that specific property if they had a mortgage. Now, if they didn't have a mortgage and they bought the property for $150,000 cash and the rent was $1,400 a month, now they'd be making $1,400 in gross cash flow. So you might say, okay, that's basic math, that's basic rental properties. Why are you talking about this? Well, it's going to heavily depend on what type of buyer wants what type of cash flow and what they're willing to deal with to get that cash flow. So for example, you could have a $30,000 house or a $50,000 house, and that house make you $700, $800, $900 in cash flow if you buy the property cash. What would you deal with if you were buying that type of property? Probably not the best tenant quality, probably not the best neighborhoods. And these properties probably aren't going up in value very much every year, which is appreciation. If you're buying a nice home in the suburbs where people want to move to with their families, great school districts, those properties are going to be going up in value every single year and appreciating. But you're typically not going to find those houses for $30,000, $40,000. So those are the two biggest buyer types. You have people that are just buying for cash flow and they're fine with inner cities. They're fine with very low priced properties and what comes with them. And then there's some people who just don't want to deal with that. They want to have a more passive investment that doesn't have as much drama that comes along with it. And they're willing to pay more for that. And they're willing to cash flow less for that privilege as well. Who are these types of buyers? So typically in these cash flow cheap house markets, and I won't name any places yet, I just want to get you guys the idea because there is both types of markets and both types of buyers in all types of cities. So I don't want you to think, okay, a city is either one or another. No, the city is the city, but there's going to be certain areas of the city that are more for cash flow, buying houses cash flowing on them and not expecting much appreciation. And then nicer neighborhoods where people are going to be paying more in rent. The house values are going to be more, but you may not make as much cash flow because the house you're buying is more expensive. The mortgage is going to be more expensive. Why do I want you guys to get an idea of this first? It's really important when it comes to what type of properties are you finding, what type of buyers are buying, and why. So the more expensive houses, a lot of times people don't need to cash flow that much because they're buying those properties for tax reasons and to park their money somewhere where the house is going to be taken care of. They're at least going to make some amount of money back and they're not too worried about that being a high income property. That's usually people with more money. And a lot of these people are going to be buying houses using real estate agents. That's just typically when someone wants to buy a property, even if it is an investment property, they're going to find a real estate agent in that market that they trust. Now, a lot of people do know about wholesaling. They might, be going on Facebook groups looking for some wholesalers, but the level of trust that comes with working with a real estate agent is just something that's just ingrained in our society. So a lot of people will be going to agents for those types of properties. And also those properties, although they're not going to be any harder to get under contract, there's going to be just less of them naturally that are going to be distressed and less of them naturally that are going to be sold at a deep discount, because these are properties you can list on the market anytime and probably sell them to a family unless there's some type of deep distress. So both property types are great to go after as a wholesaler. It's just important to know which buyer type is going to buy which property, so you're barking up the right tree when it comes to picking a market and finding the right buyers. So let's talk about the other property type when we're talking about distressed properties, lower price points, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, $80,000, even $110,000, $120,000, and sometimes even duplexes and triplexes for those prices. Now, there's a lot of markets like that. And for virtual wholesaling, these are going to be a lot easier markets because there's a lot of transactions occurring and the same property might sell 2, 3, or 4 times in the course of a year or two, just because of the investment activity in those areas. A lot of these buyers in all of these markets that I'm going to name in the inner cities, like Cleveland, Indianapolis, Birmingham, Alabama, Memphis, Tennessee, a lot of the Carolinas, Kansas City metro area, parts of Dallas, parts of Houston, they're going to have these sub $100,000 properties that someone can buy cash and then rent out for $900, $1,200, maybe even only $500 or $600. But the ultimate goal of these investors is to buy a property that's going to generate them the highest amount of income and buy the property for cheap. These properties still appreciate. It's not to say that they don't appreciate. It's just a different type of buyer that's willing to deal with different types of things. And when you're shopping for that buyer, you're going to have a way wider spectrum of what could be a deal. And it just makes it so much easier to wholesale virtually in those type of markets because you're getting a lot of cash sales that you can use for comparables. You're having a lot of investors. They might be out-of-state investors from California or New York, out-of-country investors from Israel and China. There's all these people that are looking to buy those types of cash flow properties in those markets that I just named, that it is so much easier to, when you're doing this virtually, get a list, cold call, do the cheapest, simplest, most effective marketing, and actually get deals done when you're first starting. Now, once you learn, let's say you picked Cleveland like I did out of all of those for my very first market, or St. Louis or Kansas City. Once you learn the different zip codes and the areas and who buys and why they buy, you can graduate, if you want to call it that, to the suburbs of those cities and still have these nicer properties and good school zones. If it's Cleveland, for example, you have the inner city, but then you have suburbs like Parma and Maple Heights and South Euclid, and these areas will have $250,000, $300,000 properties that you can lock up and try to create larger assignment fees. But that's going to be a different buyer type than the inner city. And in the inner city, there's just so much more activity going on as far as sales, people purchasing properties, people renovating properties. There's a lot more investor activity. So if I was to start over, I would do the same thing I did. I would find not a major metro market like a Miami and New York and LA, a metro place that has a lot of people. It has a downtown. It is a metro area, but one that is not on the map as one of the most expensive or one of the hottest rental markets out there. Find somewhere that has cheap properties under $100,000. Figure out what the buyers like and why they buy them. What areas are people buying a lot of investment properties, distressed properties, fixing them up and renting them out, or selling them to investors in other states and in other countries as cash flow properties. When you find these kinds of markets and you learn the buyer types and you learn who the buyers are in that market, it becomes really easy to start doing multiple deals a month in that same place. And you'll find in a year or two, you'll probably wholesale the same duplex or the same house 2 or 3 times. It happens because there's so much buyer activity. A lot of times, out-of-state buyers don't even really know what they're getting into. They go buy that house in the west side of Cleveland in the inner city. They don't know what to expect. They don't know the tenant quality. They don't know how to deal with the contractors. And then they end up selling it at a discount to another investor. And these properties could change hands a lot of different times just because the nature of this type of investing is so different than the nature of buying a more expensive home in a better area and holding it for a long time and renting it out to a nurse or a doctor or a family of a higher socioeconomic status than versus Section 8 and, these cheap $600-$700 rent apartments that aren't updated. You know, they're painting floors in some of these places versus putting in carpet or new flooring because it's just not worth it for the rent. So that's kind of the idea. If you have that idea of cash flow and appreciation and what would be easier to do more deals so I can get experience, so I can do a bunch of deals, learn, and then make a choice from an educated perspective versus always being like, where should I go? What market should I pick? I'm going to just try Florida because people like to move to Florida. When there's snowbirds, they buy second houses in Florida. The things that people will just like say to just do a market that they've just heard someone else is in, you're not going to have the most deals or the best results if you pick somewhere expensive. That's just what it is. But I'm not saying it's not worth it to do it. I just think if you're just starting out in wholesaling, the goal should be to do a lot of deals and get the experience and be able to choose from an educated perspective. And all of these inner cities that there is a lot of deals in, they have suburbs that you can easily expand to once you understand the market, once you understand the players, once you have actual buyers and you know what these people are looking for. If you dive into any market, you'll get deals. It doesn't matter. And I want to emphasize that because that should be the main point you take away from this video. It doesn't matter where you pick. If you're consistent and you work hard, you will get your first deal. But if you want to go on the path of least resistance, if you want to go the easiest route, to be honest, to actually get and close a deal, pick a secondary or tertiary market that has high cash flow, low property values, with a lot of investor activity. You can't go wrong. So I hope those cities that I named help. I hope this video helps. If you like this, hit the like button, share with somebody who is getting started virtually wholesaling